For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demons into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off. They reported this in the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out. He was sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, because they were overcome with fear. And so he got into the boat and he left. Now the man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away, and he told all over town how much Jesus had done for him.
I appreciate the opportunity to be at Trinity Baptist Church this morning. I get back to Vancouver from Winnipeg fairly often because I used to live in Vancouver, I have children here, and there's always good reasons to come to Vancouver. This trip's been an assault on the emotions. Part of it's been here at Trinity Baptist, because this used to be a hangout when I was a university student. It was a long time ago. We had books, but we certainly didn't have laptop computers or tablets. I couldn't read a textbook on a Kindle. So it's good to be back in the building. It's good to be with new people. Our friend Charles Gruce. I spent last evening with Charles and with colleagues from the Refugee Board. Charles was once Canada's leading immigration lawyers. Then he worked with us at the Immigration and Refugee Board and coached us and helped us. Then he went back to becoming one of Canada's leading immigration lawyers again, known for his compassion and his integrity. Lane Daggett. Lane and I worked at the Refugee Board, and I hadn't examined the website. I didn't know I'd meet Lane today. And I didn't know I'd meet Bruce Milne today. Bruce has stuck with me in one of the dark periods of life. And I've never quite understood how you found the time, Bruce, except it's how I understand God is. That he doesn't leave us during the dark periods. And so it's so good to be back here in Vancouver, to be with friends and to be with people at Trinity Baptist and participate in Lane's interim ministry. To meet Craig, whose aunt I know very well in Winnipeg, who works for the Food Grains Bank. Craig did me the favor of giving me the text over a month ago. So that gave me a chance to do a trial run in my own church in Winnipeg. And in the trial run, I did a little bit differently than today. I had an 80-year-old man who's a professor emeritus in physics, who's a member of our church, share about what made him apprehensive or fearful about 2017. And I had a 22-year-old woman do the same thing. And I think we all identified with one way or another with some of the things that they said. And there's not a lot of convergence between a 22-year-old and an 80-year-old, but there was about a couple of things. One was what's going on in the United States, as you might imagine. And the second one was on the destruction to the environment that's taking place. And what will be the impact? You know, if we had time, if we could break up in small groups and we could each say what made us apprehensive about 2017, personally and socially, we wouldn't have trouble. We'd each be able to share things. Some of our concerns are personal in nature. We may wonder if we'll measure up to the challenges that are ahead. Is our employment secure? What about health issues? What about mobility? We may be worried about finances. There may be dark clouds about circumstances that we can't name. But we have apprehensions about the unknown. And then there's social issues. The crisis of drugs on our streets, will it be abated? The unrelenting destruction to the environment. The violence that we see in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in parts of Africa. And we wonder, will there be a solution? 1 in every 113 people in the world now is on the move for various reasons. They're dislocated. Is this the new normal? The gospel reading this morning provokes emotions of fear. When we read the story of the storm on the lake and of the man called Legion, and I need your help this morning. I need you to enter into those gospel stories. Position yourselves in them. Imagine that you're with the disciples. There's 13 of you in the boat when a storm hits and waves are swamping over the side of the boat. And later, you're standing with a small crowd of people looking at this man called Legion. He's uncontrollable. He's possessed by evil. The other work I want to ask you to do this morning is to examine your own heart. You've come to church this morning with apprehensions and fears. Can you name them? Can you relate to them? Can you identify them? Before we head into the text, let me make one significant observation. The previous section of Luke's Gospel, which you dealt with last week, had the parable of the sower and the seed about receiving the message of God and holding it in a heart that is noble and good, with steadfast endurance. And then that passage ends with Jesus saying to his followers, talking to his followers about my family. And his family is not flesh and blood, genetic DNA. He said, my family, those who are closest to me, are those who hear and practice, those who do. And so we can expect that this theme will enter into the story of the boat, the story of the demoniac, and will some way shape and frame that story. So let's begin with the hurricane on the lake. I'm going to call it a hurricane because the actual word in the Greek New Testament could be used to describe a hurricane. It might seem overly dramatic to you, but it conveys the sense of vulnerability, of panic, of the men in the boat as it was being swamped by the wind and the water. And it might help us to remember that the people of Galilee were not Phoenicians who knew how to sail on the ocean. They were not Romans or Greeks who had ships that plied the Mediterranean Sea. These were land folks. These were people who were apprehensive about the ocean and even about the Lake of Galilee that could have intense storms and where every year lives were lost. Severe and unexpected storms could hit that body of water. Now, in the narrative that we read, that Craig read for us, Jesus seems unaware of the danger. And the disciples awake him with the words of panic, "Master, Master, we are perishing." I think some of us can connect with this. We've gone through times where we wondered if we were going down. And we wondered where God was. God seemed distant and unmoved. And we read the story. The narrative tells us that Jesus calmed the storm. The wind abated. The waves now gently rock the boat. The terror has passed. Jesus has acted with the authority of the Creator God. And then he turns to his followers and he says, "Where was your faith?" I think there's kind of an implied question here. Do you find it easy to believe when the sun's shining and the waves are gentle? You seem to find it harder to believe in the midst of a storm. I understand that. What's striking to me in this text is that Luke only mentions the fear of the disciples after the storm is over. They're afraid, they're amazed at the authority of Jesus over creation. They can understand a storm. They can't understand the power of the Creator God. So I'm wondering how you're reading this story. I'm sure some of us feel threatened by things that are happening around us. Perhaps some with health issues of things that are happening in us. Some people here today may feel that they are perishing. And they may want to shout out to the Lord with the disciples. I hope you'll allow me to give one of my personal readings because I have great concern for the environment, for the creation. I understand that we as humans are responsible for dead zones in the ocean. That we as humans are responsible for damage to rivers and to lakes. I live near the most threatened lake in the world, Lake Winnipeg. We as humans are responsible for the loss of biodiversity, for the extinction of plants and animals, for the pumping of hydrocarbons into the air, for threats to future generations. And this gospel narrative reaches out to me and it says, creation belongs to God. And I know that I need to listen deeply to this message. I need to listen to the entire message of the Scriptures, teaching that God gave humans the role of being stewards and caretakers of the garden in which He placed us. And I need to recall that being a caretaker requires prayerful action around issues of consumption and transportation and land use and sustainable practices. These are matters of faith, not simply matters of economics. I need to hear. I need to listen deeply. I need to trust God that He is the Creator and that the very best I can offer is to be a humble servant. So we move from the storm on a lake to a man who is a hurricane. Jesus encounters this man on the shore. He's out of control. He's dangerous. We read that he once lived in a local city. That means he was a son. He was a brother. He was a friend. He was a neighbor. But now he lives in the tombs. He wears no clothes. He shouts. He's possessed by evil, possessed by demons. There have been attempts to manage him. Men have come. They've forcefully locked him in chains and fetters. That probably means that people, women, out of compassion, brought him food to eat, attended to his basic needs. But this man could not be contained. He'd break the chains. He'd break the restraints. He was on the loose again. Children were warned, stay in their homes. Adults only dare travel by the graveyard in groups. And I want to ask you, is there something here that reminds you of the power of evil in our own time? Evil can be terrifying. Evil can be beyond a rational explanation. Look at the bombing of Aleppo. My wife Regine was hunted by neighbors for 3 months that wanted to kill her, with instructions to open her head and expose the brains of an educated Tutsi. That was during the 1994 Rwandan genocide. The same neighbors came to our wedding, celebrated our love. Evil cannot be explained. Sometimes it can't be understood, but it can be feared. The man in the narrative calls himself Legion. And that may be a clue to his bizarre and destructive behavior. A legion was a Roman army made up of 4,000 to 6,000 armed men. When the legions of the Roman commander Varus invaded Galilee after the death of Herod the Great, they burned villages. They crucified over 2,000 men. They raped women. They destroyed crops. They took children as slaves. Did the violence and the trauma of the Roman armies create an opening for evil in the life of Legion? I wonder. We don't know. In the narrative, the evil spirits speak through Legion. And they understand that Jesus is a threat to their existence. So they beg him not to send them back to the abyss. The people of Galilee believed that the abyss was a watery area under the earth where evil spirits were imprisoned. So the demons asked to be sent to the pigs. And here we see evil turning on itself, as I think it inevitably always does. And the pigs rush down the hillside and drown in the lake. And the story doesn't end there. The narrative ends with Legion's transformation. He sits at Jesus' feet. That's the posture of a disciple. He's clothed and in his right mind, a description of the virtue of self-control. Something that was as prized in the ancient world as it is today. I don't know how you want to describe this man. He's been saved, he's been redeemed, he's been restored, he's been transformed. Maybe all of those words apply. He's become the person that God intended him to be. And now the people come out from the city and the countryside, I'm sure they were afraid of Legion once, but they're more afraid of Jesus. They don't understand the power. They don't understand the power of righteousness and salvation. They ask Jesus to leave their territory. Isn't it funny how we sometimes find it easier to come to terms with evil than we do with righteousness and justice? Legion has listened, and now he takes action. He returns to his own people in the Decapolis as a witness of what God has done in his life. He's listened, and he acts. Well, we're at the conclusion time, and I've still got a few minutes, so we're okay. 5 quick points in conclusion. Let's try and draw some lessons for the new year. First of all, lesson 1. We're never as much in control as we like to imagine that we are. Storm can come out of nowhere and hit us. And evil can appear in the strangest of places. We're all humans created in God's image, but that doesn't make us invulnerable. In the words of St. Paul, we are part of the creation that is subjected to corruption while we long for the glorious liberty of the children of God. But in the meantime, we're frail and we're vulnerable. And it helps to accept that reality. Lesson number 2. Master, we are perishing, called out the people in the boat, and we too can quietly or with loud voices confess our fears before God. We don't have to find God. Jesus was there in the boat with the disciples. Jesus was standing right beside Legion in his fury. And so God has promised never to leave you, never to forsake you. Prayer is about revealing our hearts to God, even the dark parts, even the fearful parts. Number 3, change is possible. Jesus calmed the storm. Jesus transformed Legion. You know, I got 2 friends who've worked in Lebanon. One is a Canadian guy, Rupen Das, who was my colleague at CBM. The other is a Lebanese pastor. I want to give you his name. Jihad Haddad. How would you like to be a Christian pastor with the name Jihad? They both told me a story about a man who'd been I guess you'd call him a brigade commander of Al-Nusra. Al-Nusra was one of the armed groups that was operating out of Aleppo. Something like Al-Qaeda. And this man had come with his men to Lebanon to get out of the action for a while. And he was rounded up in a roundup of young Syrian men in Lebanon, put in prison. And one of the guys he was put in prison with was a Syrian who'd become a Christian. And he was on his knees praying, and this commander said to him, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Mohammed." "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm praying." "Who are you praying to?" He said, "I'm praying to Jesus." He said, "What are you, a Muslim named Mohammed, doing praying to Jesus?" And they talked, and they talked. Mohammed had a Gospel of John, and they read it. The next morning, this big man comes up to Mohammed and says, "Do you remember who I am?" And Mohammed remembered, and he said, "Something's changed. I've become a follower of Jesus. And I want you today to talk to my men. I have 25 men in this prison. I want you to tell them what you told me last night." My friend Jihad Haddad told me that he's become an evangelist of following Jesus in the way of nonviolence. They've had to move him to 6 different prisons because of death threats. And they've run out of prisons. I say that because change is possible. We sometimes act as if change wasn't possible, as if God was not in the world working transformation. Sometimes the hardest change can be change that's required in our own hearts. Lesson 4 is about faith. Jesus wondered what had happened to the faith of his followers. And aren't there times, will there not be times in 2017 when we simply need to slow down and think about faith? Reduce the anxiety. It might help us to remember that what you've been told so many times. The most common commandment, the most repeated commandment in the Scriptures, Hebrew and New Testament, is do not fear. That command only makes sense if we're in a context where we have lots of reason to fear. And I think sometimes in 2017, you're going to need to say to yourself again and again, do not fear. Do not fear. Put your name in there. Gordon, Blaine, Bruce, do not fear. This is God's Word. And lesson number 5, and with this we've drawn to the end. Listen and act. Hear and practice. Can you find a quiet place? In times of despair or anxiety, can you go back to some scriptures that have been meaningful to you in the past? Can you listen to the whisperings of the Spirit in your ear? Are you being asked to do something even in a time of confusion or fear? Is there a way for you to bear witness with gentle words and quiet deeds? Because just like Legion, we are called to bear witness in our world, in our time. Well, 2017, whether it's the calendar year or whether it's the year of the rooster, we know that there will be great blessings and there will be great challenges. Many people seem to think, and I'm one of them, that this year will be critical in many ways. And so I wish for you that God will calm your fears, that God will give you peace, that God will lead you in the paths of righteousness over the coming days, over the coming weeks, over the coming months. Lord be with you. And I believe we are moving to a final hymn.
Let's sing together, "It is well with my soul."
Number 493, if you'd like to use your hymn book, and a wonderful song of being in the storm and standing in faith. Would you please stand as we sing?